Imagine this. You're living in a haunted apartment, surrounded by chilling whispers and cold spots, but you can't leave because the rent is too high. Just when you think you can't take it anymore, the ghost of a man named Timothy appears, warning you that you're in more danger than you realize. But even with the threat of a malevolent force, you're stuck, trapped in your own fears, in a building that refuses to let go. Can you escape before it consumes you? Stick around to find out how facing your darkest fears might be the only way out of a living nightmare. A cold gust of air cut through the dimly lit hallway. The apartment, once filled with the usual hum of life, had grown eerily quiet. For weeks now, a presence had been felt, but no one spoke of it. Not directly. The sudden chill in the living room felt as if the temperature had dropped below freezing, even though it was the middle of summer. The lights flickered and the floorboards creaked under what seemed like an invisible weight. At the far corner of the room, where an old beanbag sat by the window, the air shifted. A soft voice, low and sharp, broke the silence. "You need to leave," it whispered, though no one could see where it came from. The person sitting on the opposite beanbag paused. "Not gonna happen, buddy," they muttered under their breath, eyes still fixed on the TV screen. They were used to the odd noises, the flickering lights, the strange sounds in the night. The apartment was haunted, sure, but moving was not an option. Rent was high. Too high. "I'm serious," the voice continued. "You're in danger. You need to go now. ED." The person let out a sigh, looking around their tiny apartment. They couldn't afford to move. The rent was already too high, even for this place. The apartment wasn't glamorous. It was a small, cramped one-bedroom in the heart of the city. 2 beanbags in the living room, a single table for eating that doubled as a desk, and a TV that sometimes cut out, especially during these strange moments. But this was home, at least for now. "You think I can just pack up and leave?" They chuckled, setting down the remote and leaning back. "What do you think I am? Some kind of billionaire who can afford a haunted mansion?" The voice sighed, almost as if in frustration. "This isn't a joke. You're not safe here." With a click, the TV suddenly shut off. The room plunged into darkness. The temperature plummeted again, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The person shook their head, standing up. All right, I get it. You're mad. I'm not going anywhere. Rent's too damn high." The shadows of figure began to materialize, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes, dressed in tattered clothes. A ghost. His face twisted with what appeared to be frustration, but also a strange sense of resignation. "I'm Timothy James," the figure said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to live here before everything changed." The figure didn't look like the ghostly apparitions one might expect. No floating, no ethereal glow. Instead, Timothy looked almost normal if you could look past the transparent skin and faintly glowing outline. "Yeah, well, you're not the first ghost to hang around here. Happens all the time. The neighbors, same thing. They're all ghosts too. But hey, it's a good deal for me." The person shrugged. Timothy's ghostly form seemed to flicker with annoyance. "It wasn't always like this. I wasn't just anyone. I was someone." "Who?" Timothy seemed to hesitate before answering. "I was someone who made a lot of bad decisions. Some of those decisions led me here, to this apartment, to my death. She was the last mistake I ever made." The person raised an eyebrow. "What? Like, your girlfriend killed you? Or—" Timothy's eyes seemed to narrow, his transparent features distorting with emotion. "Not exactly. It was a girl I met on Tinder. Met up for drinks. We hit it off. Or so I thought. She took me home. It wasn't long before she turned on me. The next thing I knew, I was lying in a pool of my own blood, stabbed multiple times by a complete stranger." "Damn," the person murmured. "That's rough." Timothy's ghost nodded as though he was reliving the painful memory. "She stabbed me. Then, when I was gone, she just disappeared. No one ever found her. No investigation. No justice." "That's it?" the person asked, half surprised, half skeptical. "No closure? No ghost hunter type stuff?" Timothy seemed to grow angrier. "You think it's funny? Think my death is some kind of joke? I spent my afterlife stuck here, trapped, no way to move on. And now, you're just sitting in my apartment like everything's fine. You're playing with the same fate." The person shrugged again, sitting back down on the beanbag. What do you want me to do about it? I'm just living here. Can't do anything about it. What? Rent's too damn high, remember? The ghost flickered again, visibly frustrated. You don't understand. You're in danger. The spirit of this place, of me, is cursed. The energy here, it lingers, it's toxic. I need you to leave so I can find peace. If you don't leave soon, you could share my fate. The person chuckled. What? You're gonna stab me like she did? You? I don't think so. No, Timothy replied, his voice darkening. Shh, but your life will be consumed by the same darkness. The energy in this place is too much. You won't be able to escape. You'll lose yourself just like I did. The person looked around the dim apartment. The shadows felt heavier, almost as if they were closing in. For a moment, the humor faded, and something darker filled the air. Timothy's words had a weight to them, more than just a spooky warning. They felt real, dangerous. But then the person sighed, looking at the mess of bills and rent notices on the small table across the room. Yeah, well, I hear ya. But you know what? I can't afford to move. Not now. I don't know what you expect from me. Timothy's form flickered once again, almost in despair. So you choose to stay? Even after everything? The person stood up, crossing the room to the fridge. Do you know what I have for dinner tonight? They asked, the mood lightening again. Pancake corn dogs. And I'll tell you, they're pretty damn good. So if you're gonna haunt me, at least share in some of my weird life choices. Timothy's ghost didn't respond at first. Instead, his eyes seemed to soften, as though he were reflecting on something beyond the anger and frustration. Then, with a long sigh, he disappeared into the air. And just like that, the room returned to normal. The temperature seemed to rise again. Flickering lights steadied. The eerie feeling lifted. But there was still something unsettling about the whole experience, something not quite right. The person, still standing by the fridge, knew one thing for certain. The ghost of Timothy James was real. And despite their refusal to move out, they had a feeling that whatever haunted this place, whatever lingered in the shadows, wouldn't let them stay too long. The clock on the wall ticked. The rent was still too high. And the ghost, too, would be a permanent fixture in their life for the time being. Days passed and life returned to its usual chaotic routine. The person tried to shrug off the strange encounter with Timothy's ghost, telling themselves that it was just another one of those weird, unsettling moments that life occasionally throws at you. But something about the apartment had changed. The presence lingered in a way that it hadn't before. It wasn't just the usual eerie feeling or the occasional flicker of the lights. This was different. This time, they couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost was watching them. The unease had a palpable weight to it. The apartment was too quiet now. The sounds that once filled the space, the muffled hum of the refrigerator, the creaks of the floorboards underfoot had been replaced by a strange silence that pressed in on them. They found themselves walking around the apartment, constantly glancing over their shoulder. The beanbags that once seemed like cozy, comfortable seating now felt like the places where ghosts might hide. Every time they passed the table, the rent bills seemed to mock them. Reminders that their financial situation hadn't improved, and the high cost of living was still their greatest obstacle. One evening, they sat down to eat another round of pancake corn dogs, their favorite quirky comfort food. The flickering light from the fridge hummed, and they absent-mindedly munched on the odd meal, staring at the blank TV screen in front of them. But tonight was different. Tonight the air felt heavier than ever. The low hum from the fridge, once comforting, seemed ominous. The walls seemed to close in with every passing second. The apartment felt smaller, suffocating. The presence in the room felt too real to ignore anymore. The ghost wasn't a mere nuisance. It was something that could no longer be brushed aside. Timothy. The person called into the empty room, half joking, half serious. No answer. They sighed, picking up their phone and scrolling through social media as if trying to drown out the mounting tension in the room. But just as they were about to click on a meme to lighten their mood, a low, guttural whisper sent a shiver down their spine. You shouldn't have stayed. The voice was closer this time. Presence, cold and suffocating, settled in beside them. The light overhead flickered again. The temperature dropped, and the distinct feeling of something brushing past them was unmistakable. Okay, I get it. You're pissed, they said. the joke falling flat as they stood up, eyes darting around the room. But really, where am I supposed to go?
Oh.
The rent's too high for me to even think about moving. The voice didn't respond immediately. For a moment, everything was still. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, Timothy's ghost appeared again, his transparent form slowly materializing in the corner by the window. "I warned you." "Now, there's nowhere left to run," Timothy's ghost murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow and frustration. They took a step back, their heart racing. "What are you talking about? There's no way I'm leaving. I've already said I can't afford to move. You know how this works? The world doesn't just give up on rent because you have a ghost problem." Timothy's ghost stepped forward, his expression now a mix of anger and something else, perhaps regret. "I didn't ask you to leave just because of me, it's because of them." "Who's them?" the person asked, confusion creeping in as they stood frozen in place. Timothy's form flickered once again, more unstable this time. "The spirits, ... the ones who never left this place. You think you're the first? You think this place is just haunted by me? You're wrong. This is a crossroads, a place where lost souls gather. Every single person who's lived here has been caught in its grip. Now you're one of them." The person blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Wait a minute. You mean to say this is like some kind of haunted hotspot? Great, that's just perfect." Timothy's ghost let out a hollow, pained sigh. "It's more than just that. This place is cursed. The energy here is toxic. If you stay too long, you'll lose yourself. The place itself feeds on your despair, your loneliness. People like you, the ones struggling to make ends meet, become trapped here, stuck in the cycle." The person felt a chill shoot through their body. They looked at the apartment around them, bemat the empty corners, the flickering lights, the walls that felt like they were closing in. Maybe, just maybe, Timothy's warning was more than just a ghostly threat. "You have to leave," Timothy insisted. "You think rent is too high now? Wait until it drains you completely. Not just your wallet, but your soul." The person looked down at their meal, still untouched. Pancake corn dogs. Something that had once been comforting now seemed absurd, a representation of how far they'd fallen. "I don't know what to do anymore," they muttered to themselves. Timothy's ghost stepped closer, almost sympathetically. "I didn't know either, but now I'm just another lost soul here." "Do you really want to become like me?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't just a warning, it was a plea. And as the cold chill in the room deepened, the person realized that they were facing more than just a haunted apartment. They were facing something that threatened not just their financial stability, but their very existence. The room felt even smaller now. They stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of them still wanted to laugh it off, convince themselves that it was just their overactive imagination. But deep down, they knew they couldn't ignore this anymore. The air felt too heavy, the weight of it too real. With a defeated sigh, they muttered, "So what? Am I just supposed to pack up and leave? Where am I even supposed to go?" Timothy's ghost paused as though weighing the question carefully. "You need to leave, not for me, but for you. There are other places out there, places that won't eat you alive from the inside out." The coldness of the room intensified. The shadows stretched across the walls, curling in ways that felt unnatural. The person glanced at their phone again, looking at the rent bill that was still staring back at them. It felt like the walls were closing in once more. They couldn't afford to leave. They couldn't afford to stay. Timothy's ghost seemed to sense their inner turmoil. "You might not be able to afford much. Staying here will cost you more than you think." The room grew colder still, and Timothy's form flickered again before fading into the shadows. The person stood there, in silence, the weight of their situation heavy on their shoulders. Their future felt uncertain, unsure if they were truly haunted by the ghost of Timothy Jamesor, something much darker that had been living in the apartment all along. Their apartment had never felt more like a trap. Days dragged on, and the heavy presence in the apartment never fully lifted. Every corner of the room seemed to whisper Timothy's warning, but the person, caught in the relentless cycle of rent and bills, continued to ignore it, hoping the haunting would eventually fade. But as the days turned into weeks, the ghostly encounters grew more intense. The flickering lights became more frequent, no longer just an occasional glitch, but a steady, almost rhythmic flicker, like the room was breathing. The cold spots multiplied, not just around the apartment, but following them into the kitchen, across the bathroom floor, and even into their tiny bedroom. The unsettling feeling was no longer confined to the living room, but seemed to cling to them, wrapping itself around their every move. Timothy's voice, once faint, now echoed clearer in their mind, a constant reminder of the truth they were trying to deny. "You shouldn't have stayed," Timothy's voice would whisper at the strangest moments. It's like when they were cooking or when they were trying to sleep. It was as though his presence had seeped deeper into the apartment, into the walls, into the very air they breathed. The person tried to focus on their daily routine, waking up, going to work, trying to scrape together enough for the bills, but the weight of the haunting made everything feel like an uphill battle. Even the simplest things, like sitting on their beanbags and watching TV, felt unbearable. They had grown tired of the constant tension, the way the apartment seemed to press in on them, the way the strange sounds in the walls never stopped. There was no escape. One evening, the person found themselves sitting at their small table, staring at the remnants of another weird, solitary meal, pancake corn dogs. They absent-mindedly poked at the food, not really hungry, but needing something to do to drown out the oppressive silence of the apartment. The fridge hummed louder than usual, almost vibrating. And then it happened, another whisper. This time, Timothy's voice sounded closer than ever, right behind them. "Leave," he said again, with more urgency this time. They spun around, half expecting to see Timothy standing there in the living room, but the room was empty. The place was still. The apartment had never been so silent. Yet that chilling feeling lingered in the air, thick with the invisible weight of his words. "I can't," they muttered, half to themselves. "I have nowhere else to go. The rent's too high." But even as they said it, they could feel the truth creeping up on them. The apartment wasn't just a place to live, it was becoming a trap. Each day they stayed, the deeper the grip Timothy's ghost seemed to have on them. The feeling of being watched, of being suffocated by something unseen, had never been more intense. Then it happened. The apartment, once just uncomfortable, felt outright dangerous. The front door, which had always opened without issue, suddenly became stuck. They tugged at the handle, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through them as they frantically jiggled the handle, feeling a strange resistance as if something was blocking their escape. The air grew thick again, and Timothy's voice rang out louder, sharper this time. "You can't leave. You belong here now. This place will never let you go." Frozen, they turned around to face the living room once more, but something had changed. The familiar beanbags, the table, the TV, everything felt wrong. The room had twisted, as if warped by something beyond their understanding. The furniture seemed to loom over them, as though watching, judging. The once mundane walls seemed to close in, as if the space itself was shrinking, pressing in on their chest. It was suffocating. The sudden realization hit them. They weren't alone in this apartment. It wasn't just Timothy's ghost. It was the apartment itself, cursed with something darker than just a lost soul. The walls were filled with remnants of all the souls that had come before them, people who had lived here and never left, stuck in a cycle of despair, unable to move on. And now, they were a part of it. "No, this can't be happening," they whispered in horror, backing away from the walls. "I don't belong here. I just want to leave." But the apartment didn't let them move. Lights flickered violently, casting long, erratic shadows across the walls. Timothy's ghost appeared again, this time standing in front of them, his form more solid than before, his eyes dark with sorrow and regret. "You're trapped," he said, voice grim. "Just like I was. This place is a prison, and now it's your prison too." They looked around in panic, hoping for any way out. But everything seemed distorted, as if the world outside the apartment didn't exist anymore. The door was still stuck. The windows were sealed shut. The apartment felt like a cage, and no matter how hard they fought, they couldn't escape. "Didn't mean to," they pleaded, falling to their knees. I couldn't afford to leave. Had no choice." Timothy's ghost slowly approached, his eyes filled with a deep, almost unbearable sadness. "I know," he whispered, "but now you have the choice. Leave before it's too late." The apartment began to shake, the walls groaning as though it was alive, refusing to let them go. Panic swelled inside them, but a small part of them knew Timothy was right. The ghost wasn't just warning them, he was trying to save them. But could they leave in time? Was there a way out? Suddenly, a soft voice, an unfamiliar one, echoed in the background. Another presence had joined the room. A new voice, calm and eerily soothing. "You're not alone," it said. Turning their head, they saw a faint figure standing by the window. It was another ghost, but this one wasn't angry, wasn't threatening. It looked lost. The ghost spoke again. "We've all been trapped here, but it doesn't have to end this way. There's a way out. You just need to break the cycle." For the first time, the person felt a flicker of hope. But was it enough to break free? Would they be able to escape before the apartment consumed them like it had consumed so many others? The room seemed to close in around them, but in that moment, they knew they had to try. They had no other choice but to face the terrifying unknown, even if it meant fighting against everything they thought they knew about the apartment. The ghosts and their own place in this haunted world. They stood, determined, heart-pounding, ready to do whatever it took to break free. But the question remained, would they be able to escape this haunting, or would they be doomed to live in this prison forever? The apartment was waiting, and it wasn't letting go. The air in the apartment was thick with tension as they stood there staring at the figures, the ghost of Timothy, who seemed to be pleading for them to leave, and the unfamiliar ghost by the window who spoke with a calming yet eerie tone. The apartment had become more than just a physical space. It felt like a living, breathing entity, one that was as much a part of their life now as the memories they had of it. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the apartment itself had become sentient, feeding off the emotions and despair of the people who had once lived here. The unfamiliar ghosts by the window spoke again, this time with a slight edge of urgency in their voice. "It's not just the rent that's holding you here, it's your fears. The longer you stay, the harder it will be to leave. This place feeds on them. It feeds on you. You have to confront what's keeping you here." The person's pulse quickened. They'd spent so long trying to ignore the whispers, trying to brush off the oddities that had plagued their life in the apartment. But now, in this moment, the full weight of their choices hit them like a ton of bricks. The rent was high, yes, but there was more to it. Their own fears, their own feelings of being trapped in life, had fueled this haunting. The apartment was a reflection of their internal struggles, a constant reminder that they were stuck. Not just in a place, but in a life they couldn't escape. "Fears," they muttered, barely able to comprehend what the ghost was trying to convey. "But I've had to make this work. I can't afford anything else, and I can't just leave everything behind." Timothy's ghost stepped closer, a shadow of regret passing across his transparent features. "That's exactly it," he said softly. "I understand what you're going through. I thought I could push my problems aside too. But here I am, stuck in this place, with no way to move on. You can't outrun your fears. And that's what you're doing. You're trapped here, not because of the rent, but because you're afraid of change." The unfamiliar ghost nodded, adding, "The apartment knows this. It senses it, and it uses it to keep you here. If you don't confront your fears, if you don't break free from your self-imposed prison, this place will drag you down just like it did to me." The person took a step back, the weight of their past choices pressing on them. The apartment, the haunting, it all felt like it was closing in on them. And for a moment they felt like they couldn't breathe. They'd spent so long trying to make ends meet, trying to avoid the reality of their situation. But now, standing here, they realized that they weren't just haunted by a ghost named Timothy James. They were haunted by their own fears of failure, of being stuck in a life that wasn't their own. "How do I break free?" they asked, their voice shaking, unsure if the question was aimed at the ghosts or themselves. Timothy's form seemed to soften, a flicker of compassion passing through his ghostly figure. "You have to face it. The fear, the self-doubt, the feeling that you can't do better, that you can't change. You've been telling yourself that you're stuck, but it's not true. You have the power to change, to leave this place. But it's up to you. If you keep holding on to your fear, this apartment will have you forever." The ghost by the window leaned in closer, their voice filled with a quiet intensity. "You must act. You're stronger than you think, but you can't keep running from what's inside you. It's holding you here, keeping you in the cycle. Face it. Break the chains. The person stood still for a long moment, the weight of the ghost's words pressing heavily on their chest. Timothy's warning was clear: stay, and they would be consumed, trapped in the same cycle that had doomed him. The apartment would feed off their fear, their hesitation, their inability to let go of what held them back. For the first time in a long while, they felt something stir inside them. It was a spark of clarity, a flicker of hope. They didn't have to stay in this apartment, stuck in this life of barely getting by. The haunting was a reflection of their own inner turmoil, and if they wanted to escape it, they needed to confront their own fear of change, of moving forward. With a deep breath, they took a step toward the door that had been stuck, the one that had refused to open. They grabbed the handle, ready to try again, but this time with a new sense of purpose. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, and then, with a creak, the door began to open. The apartment seemed to shudder, as if protesting their decision to leave, but the person didn't look back. They stepped out into the hallway, feeling a rush of freedom that they hadn't felt in months. The air was different now, lighter, almost refreshing. They could hear their heartbeat thumping in their ears, but it wasn't fear this time. It was excitement. The sense of release was overwhelming. But just as they were about to step into the elevator, ready to leave this haunted place for good, they heard Timothy's voice once more. This time, it wasn't filled with warning or anger, but with something else, something softer. "You're free," Timothy said, his voice calm and almost proud. "I couldn't leave this place until I let go of my own fear. Now you're free to." The person turned back, looking at the now empty apartment door. They had done it. They had faced their fear, and they were leaving. The weight that had pressed on their chest for so long had lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe easy. As the elevator doors closed behind them, they couldn't help but smile, a sense of liberation flooding over them. They knew there were still challenges ahead. Life wasn't going to get easier overnight, but they had taken the first step. And that, they realized, was the most important one. They left the building that night, a part of them grateful for the haunting that had pushed them to confront their fears. They had escaped not just the apartment, but the chains that had bound them for so long. And whatever the future held, they knew they would face it with a new sense of courage. The ghosts of the past, both real and imagined, were finally behind them. And though they were free, they couldn't help but wonder how many others were still trapped. Like Timothy, in the same cycle, afraid to leave because of the fear of the unknown. The haunting wasn't just about ghosts, it was about the fears that kept people stuck. But for now, they were free. And that was enough. And so, they moved on, stepping into a new chapter of their life, with the weight of the past finally lifted. Weeks passed, and the person found themselves adjusting to life outside the haunted apartment. The freedom they had fought for wasn't instantaneously easy, but it was theirs. They found a small but cozy new place, one that didn't have the oppressive weight of a ghost or the suffocating presence of financial pressure hanging over them. The rent was more manageable, though still a bit high, but it didn't feel impossible now. They no longer had to sleep with one eye open, worried about the strange noises or the cold spots creeping in at night. But there was something deeper that had changed in them, a shift that went beyond just escaping a haunted apartment. With every passing day, they noticed how much lighter they felt. They were free, not just from the ghost, but from the cycle of fear and self-doubt that had held them captive for so long. The haunting had been a reflection of their own internal struggles. And once they'd faced those fears head-on, they found that the world seemed a little more welcoming, a little less heavy. But the memory of Timothy James's desperate warnings, his unrelenting presence, lingered with them. They had escaped, yes. They knew that the ghosts of the world, the ones that didn't just haunt buildings, but also the hearts and minds of people, were still out there. Timothy had been a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacles were the ones we build for ourselves, our own fears, our own reluctance to change. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes in their new apartment, they found an old notebook, the one they'd kept during the time they'd lived in the haunted place. It was filled with scribbled thoughts, random observations, and occasional rants about the haunting. As they flipped through the pages, one entry caught their eye. It was from just after the first encounter with Timothy's ghost, when the presence in the apartment had first made itself known. "Why am I so afraid?" the entry read. "Why do I feel like I'm stuck in this place when all I want is to move on? The rent is high, the bills are mounting. It's not just the apartment that's holding me here, it's me. I'm holding myself back." The words felt like they were written by a different person, someone who was still trapped in the past, still afraid to make a change. They closed the notebook and set it down on the table, realizing just how far they had come. It was hard to believe that the person who had written those words had ever been the one sitting alone in a haunted apartment, too scared to move, too scared to face the reality that they were their own worst enemy. But now, they knew better. They knew that no amount of supernatural haunting could compare to the struggles people faced within themselves. The ghosts of their own making were the ones that needed to be confronted, whether they were fears of failure, of change, or of never being able to escape the patterns they had created. And that was the real challenge. They didn't have all the answers, but they were learning. Each day was a small victory, finding the courage to try new things, to push through challenges, and to let go of the fear that had once held them back. They still didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time they felt empowered to face it head-on. The haunting, while terrifying at the time, had been a catalyst for growth. Timothy's ghost, strange and unsettling as it had been, had given them the wake-up call they needed. They had thought they were haunted by a ghost, but the truth was, they had been haunted by their own doubts and fears all along. They stood up from the table and looked out the window, the sun setting behind the city's skyline. There was a new sense of hope, a quiet certainty that no matter what came next, they were ready. The past was behind them, the future was theirs to shape. And just as they were about to sit down and continue with their evening, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it seemed important. They hesitated for a moment but answered. "Hello," they said, their voice calm. The voice on the other end was soft and familiar. "Hey, ... It's Timothy. I know I'm not the easiest person to get along with, but I wanted to thank you for leaving the apartment, for facing what you needed to face." The person blinked, confused for a second. Then they remembered. The ghost. Timothy. They thought for a moment, and then spoke, still trying to wrap their head around the situation. "You ... you're still around?" Timothy's voice seemed lighter now, almost peaceful. "I've moved on, finally. And I'm at peace now. You gave me that by leaving and letting go. You didn't just escape the apartment. You freed both of us." The person smiled softly, feeling a strange sense of closure. "Well, I guess we both got out then." "Yeah, we did," Timothy's voice replied, a trace of gratitude in his tone. "Just remember, the hardest ghosts to get rid of are the ones inside us. Don't let them keep you trapped, all right?" "I won't," the person said, their voice steady. "Thank you, Timothy." And just like that, the line went silent. They set the phone down gently, a feeling of peace washing over them. The ghost was gone, but in a way they realized, so was the haunting. The weight they had carried for so long was finally lifted. They had faced their fears, and now they could truly move on. With the soft hum of their new apartment around them, they settled into the quiet, knowing that they had overcome something far more significant than just a haunting. They had freed themselves from the chains of their own self-doubt. As they sat there, taking it all in, one thought lingered. The most frightening ghosts aren't the ones that haunt us at night, but the ones that live inside our minds. But now, they were free. Weeks turned into months, and with every passing day, life felt a little more normal. The new apartment, with its simplicity and peace, became a sanctuary, a place of comfort rather than anxiety. They still couldn't shake the memory of the haunted apartment, of Timothy's ghost and the eerie presence that had once filled every room. But as the days stretched on, it became more of a distant memory, a reminder of how far they'd come. They made progress, not just in their living situation, but in their own personal growth. The fear that had once kept them stuck in the apartment, fear of failure, of change, of being unable to move forwards, slowly faded. They found themselves taking small risks, pushing their boundaries in ways they hadn't before. They started a new job, met new people, and even took up hobbies they had long abandoned. The freedom that had once seemed elusive now felt like something they could reach out and grasp. But the memories of the haunting never fully left them. They'd wake up some mornings, still with that inexplicable feeling of being watched. Though the apartment was empty and quiet, they would occasionally glance over their shoulder, expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. But each time, there was nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the trees outside the window, the quiet hum of everyday life. One afternoon, while unpacking some old boxes from their previous place, they found something they hadn't expected, an old weathered envelope addressed to them. They hadn't seen it in months, buried deep in the box under old photos and knickknacks. They picked it up, confused, and read the name written on the front, Timothy James. Confusion turned to intrigue as they carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. They unfolded it and began to read. "I wanted to reach out one final time. Thank you for helping me move on. I know this message will seem strange, but I have one more thing to tell you. The apartment sits not just me. There's something else there, something older, something far more powerful. I don't know if it was my death or just the energy in that place, but it's still there. Whatever you do, don't go back. It won't let go easily. I've found peace, but you're still connected to that place. Break the bond before it comes after you again." The handwriting was shaky, as though written in a hurry. The signature at the bottom read, Timothy James. They sat back, the paper trembling in their hands. It didn't make sense. They had left the apartment and had broken free from whatever Timothy had warned them about. So why did this message come now? What was it that Timothy had been trying to tell them? Something darker still lingering in that old building. For the first time since moving out, a chill ran down their spine. A ghostly encounter, the strange events, the feeling of being trapped. Was it really over? The apartment they had left behind seemed to haunt them still. Even though they had moved on in every sense, there was a lingering attachment, an unspoken bond that Timothy had hinted at. Could it be that the apartment wasn't just haunted by ghosts of the past? Was there something else? Something ancient that had caused it? All the twisted energy that fed off fear, grief, and regret? They couldn't ignore it anymore. The message, the warning, had broken through the walls of the life they had tried to build. They had to know. Were they really free? Or was there something still waiting for them? The thought of returning to the apartment filled them with a cold dread. The rent was long overdue. The building had likely been rented out to someone else by now. Still, they felt a strange pull. Timothy had told them not to go back, but what if that was the only way to truly break free? The decision weighed heavily on their heart. They couldn't just ignore the warning, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they needed closure that would allow them to move forward completely, without the constant nagging fear that the apartment's grip was still holding them. They grabbed their keys, not entirely sure why they felt compelled to do so, but knowing in their gut that they had to confront this final chapter. The elevator ride down to the building felt longer than usual, the walls of the building growing more oppressive with each floor they passed. The doors opened with a soft ding, and they stepped out into the hallway, which looked strangely familiar yet off. It felt as though the walls had somehow shifted in the time they had been away, darker, quieter, more suffocating. Their footsteps echoed in the hallway as they walked down the familiar path toward their old apartment. The door was shut just as they had left it. There was no sign of anyone else living there. The eerie silence weighed heavily in the air, and the temperature seemed to drop noticeably as they stood in front of the door. Taking a deep breath, they reached for the handle, the cold metal sending a jolt of unease through their fingertips. This was it. This was the moment they had to face whatever was waiting inside, whatever energy had been lingering, unbroken, in the walls of the apartment. With a swift motion, they turned the handle and pushed the door open. The apartment stood still, untouched. The same beanbags were there, in their usual spot, but everything felt wrong. The once comfortable space now felt suffocating, as though the very air had been sucked out. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, pooling in the corners of the room. The faint, unsettling feeling of being watched crept over them again. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further. The lights flickered and buzzed with static, casting strange, jerky shadows against the walls. But there was something more, something darker, lurking in the corners. A presence not just of Timothy's ghost, but something far older, something more powerful. The door slammed shut behind them with a force that nearly knocked them over. They spun around, heart racing, but there was no time to escape. The apartment was alive again, and it wasn't letting go this time. They had to confront whatever haunted this place. And only by doing so could they finally break free from the cycle of fear. The door slammed shut with such force that the walls reverberated, the room suddenly feeling smaller, darker. A cold wind blew through the apartment, though there were no open windows. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, unnatural shadows that danced across the walls. The familiar hum of the refrigerator was now a low, menacing growl, like the sound of something far too powerful and ancient to ignore. The person stood frozen in place, heart pounding in their chest. They couldn't help but feel that they had crossed some kind of threshold, a point of no return. Everything they had feared in the apartment, every strange encounter, every eerie noise, seemed to have come to a head in this moment. It wasn't just Timothy's ghost lingering anymore. No, it was something much darker, something much more ancient and powerful. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted further, the chills settling deep into their bones. They could see their breath fog in the air as the apartment seemed to exhale a heavy, suffocating breath of its own. The air felt thick, like the very atmosphere was absorbing their fear, feeding off it. And then they heard the sound of shuffling footsteps behind them. The hairs on their necks stood up, and their hearts skipped a beat. Slowly, they turned. In the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to twist and writhe. Something was emerging from the darkness, a shape taking form, faint at first, but then solidifying. It was a figure, tall and featureless, but somehow suffused with a presence so overwhelming that they could feel its power pulse through the air like an electrical current. Their breath caught in their throat. This wasn't Timothy. This was something else, something ancient. It stepped forward, its form shifting as it moved closer, but its essence felt unearthly, like it didn't belong in this world. The space around them seemed to distort, like the room itself was bending under the weight of its presence. Leave. The voice that emanated from the figure wasn't human. It was a low, gravelly whisper, and it seemed to reverberate in their chest. You shouldn't have come back. They tried to speak, but their voice failed them. They could feel the power of the entity pushing against them, overwhelming them with an oppressive, suffocating force. Why? They managed to croak, trying to find their voice. What is this place? What do you want? The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, as though it were sizing them up. The shadows seemed to darken even further, the air growing colder still. This place has always been mine, it said, its voice both a whisper and a growl. And now you are too. The entity raised its arm, and the air shifted with an unnatural hum, like the room itself was warping. The walls groaned, and the floor trembled. The door slammed shut again, as though the apartment had a mind of its own, locking them inside. Backing away toward the window. But the shadows moved faster than they could, closing the distance in an instant. It wasn't just the apartment's haunting anymore. It was something far more sinister, and it was pulling them back into the cycle of despair. You can't escape, the voice boomed. You belong here now. With each step they took back, the apartment seemed to shift, moving closer, its walls squeezing in like they were closing around them. The very air became dense, thick with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. The entity stepped closer still, and with each passing second, its presence seemed to grow stronger, more overwhelming. Suddenly, a familiar sound cut through the thick tension, the soft, mournful whisper of Timothy's voice. Leave now. Before it takes you to Timothy's figure appeared at the far side of the room, a faint, translucent image. He stood there, flickering in the cold air, his features full of both sadness and urgency. Timothy, they gasped, barely able to believe their eyes. You shouldn't have come back, Timothy repeated, his form flickering once more as he stepped forward. This thing, it's been here long before I was. It feeds off the fear of everyone who has lived here, stronger than anything you've ever felt, as the shadowy figure hissed, its presence looming over them, crackling with dark energy. You cannot stop it, it growled. You are mine. You all are. Timothy's ghost reached out with a trembling hand. "I can help you," he said, his voice soft. "But you have to trust me." They stared at him, torn between the overwhelming fear of the shadow in front of them and the ghost that had once warned them to leave. Timothy had been a victim of this place too. Could they trust him to lead them out? The figure turned toward Timothy, and the air grew even colder. "Do not help them," it spat. "They belong to me now." Timothy's ghost flickered violently. "I never wanted to be a part of this. None of us do. But this place traps you. So the longer you stay, the more of you it takes. You can break free, but you have to act fast." The person glanced between the two Timothy, still flickering in the corner of the room, and the dark figure that seemed to loom over them, more tangible, more terrifying with every passing second. They couldn't feel the warmth of their old life, their apartment, their world. All they felt was the pressure of the haunted walls closing in. But they knew in that moment that they had to act. This was their last chance. They had to break free, not just from the apartment, but from the fear that had plagued them for so long. They couldn't let themselves be consumed. They had already faced so much, and they weren't going to let it end here. They turned back to the entity. "I'm leaving," they said, their voice shaking but firm. "I will not stay here, not anymore." The figure screeched, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that rattled the windows and reverberated in their bones. The walls shook as though the apartment itself were trying to fight back. Timothy's ghost moved forward, his form solidifying slightly more. "Trust me," he whispered. "Follow my lead." With one final determined step, the person turned to the door and pushed with all their might. The door, which had once been locked, opened easily this time, as if the apartment was finally releasing its grip on them. The figure screamed in rage as they stepped through the door, slamming it behind them. The air outside the apartment was colder than it had been in weeks, but it felt like freedom. They didn't look back. They couldn't. But as they stepped away from the building, they could feel something. The weight of the apartment, the dark presence, was finally lifting. Timothy had helped them escape. The haunting was over. And as they walked away from that place, they realized that the true key to freedom had been facing their own fears, breaking the cycle, and choosing to leave behind what had once held them captive. It was over, and they were free. The person walked down the street, their footsteps quickening as they distanced themselves from the haunting apartment. The night air felt crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere they had left behind. The darkness no longer felt oppressive, but rather liberating. With every step, they felt a sense of relief, as if the weight of years of fear, doubts, and self-imposed limitations had been lifted. For the first time in a long time, they could breathe easy. As they reached the end of the block and looked back one final time, the apartment building stood quiet in the distance. The cold, chilling sensation that had once clung to them was gone. They were free from the shadows, free from the haunting, free from the fears that had ruled their life for so long. And while they knew their journey was far from over, this was the beginning of something new, something better. As they turned their back on the past, they felt a sense of empowerment, like they had finally taken control of their own life. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. No longer would they be bound by the ghosts of their own fears or the power of a haunted apartment. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. If you've enjoyed this intense, eerie tale of survival and self-discovery, then you won't want to miss what's coming next. Dive deeper into other chilling stories, mysterious hauntings, and real-life encounters with the unknown. Our next video reveals another mind-bending mystery, one that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next adventure. Like and share if you're ready for more spine-tingling tales, and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. What's the scariest encounter you've ever had? Let's talk about it, and stay tuned for more thrilling content. Till next time, remember, the truth is out there. It's more terrifying than you think.